Answer honestly. How many hours this week did you waste managing other people's opinions of you? Not building anything, not creating, just managing perceptions, crafting careful words, rehearsing explanations for choices that need no defense. Here's what Han Fei understood 23 centuries ago that you're only learning now. The moment you need someone to understand you, you've already lost. Mental unbreakability doesn't come from being liked or validated. It comes from becoming emotionally waterproof to judgment, even your own, especially your own. The 7 rules I'm sharing today aren't about thinking positive thoughts or building resilience through repetition. They're about rewiring the fundamental assumption that's been draining your power since childhood. Think about it for a second. Really think about it. How much of your mental energy this week went into explaining yourself, defending a decision you made, crafting the perfect text message so it couldn't be misunderstood, rehearsing what you'd say if someone confronted you about something, playing out imaginary conversations in your head where you finally get to explain your side and they finally get it? How many hours? 5, 10, 20? And here's the part that should terrify you. What did you build during those hours? What did you create? What moved forward in your actual life while you were busy managing the theater of other people's perceptions? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. You were running in place, exhausting yourself, convincing yourself this was important work when really you were just bleeding energy into a void that can never be filled. Because here's the truth that no one wants to say out loud. No amount of explanation will ever be enough. Not for the people who've already decided what they think about you. Not for the ones who need you to be wrong so they can be right. Not even for yourself, because you, yes, you, are often your own harshest, most unreasonable critic. I've spent years studying this. Not just reading books, but watching people. Watching how the strong ones move through the world versus how the fragile ones do. And I'm not talking about physical strength. I'm talking about that rare quality where someone can take a hit, criticism, betrayal, failure, loss, and somehow they don't shatter. They bend, they adapt, they keep moving. While everyone else is still on the ground, replaying what happened, explaining to anyone who'll listen why it wasn't their fault. The mentally unbreakable have a secret, and it's not what you think. It's not positive thinking. It's not affirmations in the mirror. It's not building up this fortress of confidence that nothing can penetrate. Actually, it's almost the opposite. It's this strange ability to stop needing things from other people. Stop needing them to understand. Stop needing them to approve. Stop needing them to validate that, yes, you made the right choice. Yes, you're a good person. Yes, your feelings are justified. The moment you need that validation, you've handed someone else the remote control to your nervous system. They can push your buttons whenever they want, and you'll dance. Every time. Han Fei understood this back in ancient China, in the 3rd century before Christ. He was watching kingdoms rise and fall, and he noticed something interesting. It wasn't the biggest armies that won. It wasn't the richest kingdoms. It was the rulers who could think clearly when everyone around them was losing their minds. The ones who could make decisions based on reality, not ego. The ones who didn't need to be loved. Who didn't waste energy managing perceptions. Who could act ruthlessly when needed because they weren't enslaved to how it would look. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds cold, manipulative, Machiavellian even. And yeah, it is Machiavellian. I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. But here's what I need you to understand. There's a difference between being cruel and being clear, between being heartless and being honest, and most importantly, between being manipulative toward others and simply refusing to be manipulated yourself. The 7 rules I'm about to share with you aren't about becoming some cold, calculating sociopath. They're about becoming psychologically sovereign, about reclaiming the massive amount of energy you're currently hemorrhaging into other people's opinions, into defending yourself, into managing how you're perceived. That energy, you need it. You need it for the things that actually matter, for building the life you want, for showing up for the people you love, for creating something meaningful. But you can't do any of that while you're on your knees, begging the world to understand you. So here's what we're doing today. I'm going to walk you through 7 psychological principles that the mentally unbreakable understand and live by. These aren't feel-good platitudes. These are rewiring instructions for your brain. They're going to challenge some things you've been taught, some things you maybe believe about yourself. And if you're someone who's been struggling, who feels like life keeps knocking you down and you can't figure out why you're not as resilient as you thought you'd be, I need you to stay with me. Because the problem isn't that you're weak. The problem is that you've been following the wrong instructions. You've been told that strength means staying positive, that resilience means bouncing back quickly, that healing means processing your emotions and learning to love yourself. And sure, there's truth in all that, but there's also something missing, something crucial. And that missing piece is this. You have to stop identifying with every thought and feeling that moves through you. You have to create space between the observer and the observed, between the you that experiences things and the you that decides what those experiences mean. Most people never learn this distinction. They're their thoughts. They're their emotions. Someone criticizes them, and they don't think, oh, this person is expressing an opinion. They think, I am being attacked. My worth is being questioned. I need to defend myself. And off they go into that exhausting spiral of explanation and justification and mental rehearsal. The mentally unbreakable person experiences the exact same criticism, feels the exact same sting. But somewhere between the stimulus and the response, there's a gap, a pause, a moment where they step back and think, interesting. This person has this opinion about me. Is it useful? Does it contain truth I need to hear? Or is this just noise? And depending on the answer, they either integrate the feedback or dismiss it entirely. No explanation needed. No defense mounted. No hours spent crafting the perfect response. This isn't about being cold. It's about being free. Now, you might be wondering why I'm starting with this. Why, if there are 7 rules, am I spending so much time on this idea of not explaining yourself? And the reason is simple. This is the foundation. Everything else we're going to talk about builds on this core understanding. If you don't get this right, the other 6 rules won't matter. You'll just be building a house on sand. Because here's the lie that's been crippling you. You think you're weak because you feel too much. You think the problem is that you're too sensitive, too emotional, too affected by what people say and think. And so you've been trying to fix yourself, trying to care less, trying to be tougher, trying to build up this armor so things don't hurt as much. But that's not the problem. The problem isn't that you feel things deeply. The problem is that you believe everything you feel. You treat your emotions like facts. Your anxiety tells you something bad is going to happen, and you believe it. Your shame tells you you're fundamentally flawed, and you believe it. Your anger tells you that you've been wronged, and you deserve an apology, and you believe it. And because you believe it, you act on it. You defend yourself. You explain. You justify. You try to make people understand. You try to make yourself feel better by getting validation from others. And in doing all of that, you're just tightening the chains. The mentally unbreakable feel everything you feel. Every bit of anxiety, shame, anger, hurt. They're not robots. They're not suppressing or numbing or pretending. But they've learned, and this is crucial, they've learned to observe their feelings without obeying them, to acknowledge emotions without being governed by them, to say, yes, I feel angry, and also, responding from this anger would be stupid, or, yes, I feel shame, and also, this shame is a liar. This is the first piece of psychological sovereignty, the ability to feel without identification, to experience without attachment, to notice that you're having thoughts and feelings without becoming them. And once you understand this, once you really get it, everything changes. Because suddenly you realize you don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't need anyone to understand your choices. You don't need to defend yourself to people who've already decided what they think. You can just live your life, make your decisions, and let people think whatever they're going to think. Does this mean you become some isolated island, never explaining anything to anyone? No, of course not. There are people in your life who've earned a right to understand you. People you're in deep relationship with. People whose opinions actually matter because you've chosen to value them. You explain things to them. You share your reasoning. You invite them into your inner world. But here's the key. You do it because you choose to, not because you need to. You do it from a place of abundance, not desperation. You're sharing, not defending. You're inviting them in, not begging them to validate you. Can you feel the difference? Can you feel how different those two energies are? One is powerful, the other is powerless. One is generous, the other is needy. One comes from sovereignty, the other comes from slavery. And most of you, if you're honest, have been living in slavery. Enslaved to the opinions of people who don't matter. Enslaved to your own need for approval. Enslaved to this exhausting performance of managing how you're perceived. It's time to stop. Now, let me tell you why this matters so much. Why I'm being so intense about this. Because there's a cost to this constant explanation, this constant defense. And the cost isn't just your time and energy, though that alone would be reason enough to stop. The real cost is deeper. The real cost is that every time you explain yourself to someone who doesn't deserve an explanation, you're training yourself to believe that you need permission to exist. You're reinforcing this neural pathway that says, my choices are only valid if others approve. My feelings are only real if others validate them. My worth is only secure if others confirm it. And that belief, that core operating system, will destroy you. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, over years and decades, it will erode your ability to trust yourself, to make bold decisions, to take risks, to stand alone when necessary. Because you'll always be looking over your shoulder, checking to see if people still approve, if you're still doing it right, if you're still acceptable. The mentally unbreakable don't look over their shoulder. Not because they don't care about people, but because they've done the math and they understand something crucial. The approval of others is the most expensive thing you can buy. It costs you your autonomy, your authenticity, your peace of mind. And here's the kicker. You can never buy enough of it. It's never enough. There's always someone else who doesn't approve. Always another judgment to manage. Always another explanation to craft. It's a rigged game. The only way to win is to stop playing. Han Fei watched this play out in the courts of ancient China. He saw brilliant advisors, wise strategists, capable leaders, all of them destroyed not by their enemies, but by their need for approval. They'd make the right decision, but then spend so much energy justifying it, explaining it, defending it, that they'd exhaust themselves. Or worse, they'd make the wrong decision because it was the popular one, because it was what people wanted to hear, because it would make them look good, and their kingdoms fell, not because they lacked intelligence or strength, but because they lacked the psychological fortitude to stand alone, to make unpopular decisions, to let people misunderstand them. There's this story Han Fei tells about a prince who had two advisors. One advisor always agreed with him, always praised his decisions, made him feel wise and powerful and right. The other advisor questioned him, challenged him, sometimes even humiliated him in front of others by pointing out flaws in his reasoning. Guess which advisor the prince preferred? The one who made him feel good, obviously. The one who validated him. And guess which advisor he eventually executed? The honest one. The one who challenged him. Because the prince couldn't handle being questioned. Couldn't handle the discomfort of someone not agreeing with him. And then his kingdom fell. Because he'd surrounded himself with yes men. With people who told him what he wanted to hear. And when reality came knocking, when actual problems arose that required honest assessment and difficult decisions, there was no one left to tell him the truth. Now, here's where this gets personal. That prince? That's your mind. You have two advisors inside your head right now. One of them is the voice that comforts you. That tells you you're right. That validates your anger, your hurt, your interpretation of events. That says, yes, you should defend yourself. Yes, you should explain. Yes, you deserve that apology. Yes, those people were wrong about you. That's the advisor you listen to most. That's the one you promote. That's the one you trust. And then there's the other advisor, the one that sometimes says uncomfortable things. That questions your motives. That points out when you're being defensive or reactive or driven by ego. That suggests maybe you're wrong, maybe you're missing something, maybe you need to look at this differently. That voice that says, do you really need to send that text? Do you really need to explain yourself to this person? Do you really need to win this argument? That's the advisor you ignore. That's the one you demote. That's the one you find annoying. And here's what I need you to understand. If you want to become mentally unbreakable, You have to fire the comfortable advisor and promote the brutal one. You have to start listening to the voice that challenges you, not the one that coddles you. Because the voice that makes you feel good in the moment is the voice that's keeping you weak. This is hard. I'm not going to pretend it's easy. Because that critical inner voice, that questioning voice, it doesn't feel good to listen to. It's uncomfortable. It requires you to look at yourself honestly, to admit when you're wrong, to acknowledge when you're being driven by ego or fear or the need for validation. But here's what happens when you start doing this. You become unmanipulable, because manipulation works by triggering your emotional reactivity. Someone criticizes you, and if you immediately feel defensive and need to explain yourself, they've got you. They can control you just by pushing that button. But if you can observe that defensive feeling without acting on it, if you can question whether you really need to respond, suddenly they've got nothing. Their criticism just hangs in the air, and you're free to take it or leave it. This is power, real power, not the kind that comes from being loud or aggressive or dominant, the kind that comes from being unshakable, from being internally referenced instead of externally validated. And this brings me to the first actual rule, the first psychological principle that separates the unbreakable from the fragile. And it's this: emotional detachment is not the same as emotional suppression. Let me say that again, because this is where most people get confused. Emotional detachment is not emotional suppression. You've probably been told your whole life that you need to feel your feelings, that suppressing emotions is unhealthy, that you need to process everything, sit with discomfort, really lean into what you're experiencing. And there's truth in that. Suppression doesn't work. Pushing things down, pretending you don't feel them, numbing yourself, that creates problems. That leads to explosions later. That makes you fragile. But here's what they don't tell you. There's a third option. It's not suppression, and it's not full identification. It's observation. It's detachment. It's the ability to feel something fully while simultaneously knowing that this feeling is just weather passing through your system. It's not who you are. It's not ultimate truth. It's just an experience happening in this moment. Think about physical pain for a second. Let's say you touch a hot stove. You feel pain instantly. Sharp, intense, attention-grabbing pain. Now, you don't suppress that pain. You don't pretend it's not happening. But you also don't identify with it. You don't think, I am pain. This pain defines me. This pain means something fundamental about who I am. No, you think, ouch, that hurts. I should move my hand and run it under cold water. You observe the pain, you respond appropriately, and then you move on. You don't spend the next 3 hours replaying the moment you touched the stove, explaining to everyone why you touched it, defending yourself against people who think you shouldn't have been near the stove in the first place. But with emotional pain, that's exactly what you do. Someone criticizes you, and you feel that sting, that hurt. And instead of just observing it, ouch, that stung. Interesting. You make it mean something. You make it about your worth, your competence, your lovability. And then you can't let it go. You have to explain. You have to defend. You have to make them understand that they're wrong about you. The mentally unbreakable feel the exact same sting. They just don't make it mean anything about who they are. They observe it, assess whether there's useful information in the criticism, and then they move on. No explanation needed. No defense mounted. No hours spent in mental gymnastics. This is emotional detachment, not suppression, not pretending you don't feel things, but creating enough space between the feeling and the response that you can choose what to do with it. And here's why this matters so much. Most of your suffering isn't coming from what happens to you. It's coming from what you make it mean. Someone doesn't text you back, and your anxiety tells you they're mad at you. They don't like you anymore. You said something wrong. And you believe it. You treat that anxiety as if it's giving you accurate information about reality, when really, it's just your nervous system doing what nervous systems do, scanning for threats, making up stories to explain gaps in information. The unbreakable person experiences the exact same anxiety, exact same catastrophic thoughts, but they've learned to observe those thoughts with skepticism, to question them, to say, okay, brain, I hear you. You're worried. But is there any actual evidence for this story you're telling? Or are you just doing your thing? And usually, almost always, The answer is no. There's no evidence. It's just the brain doing its job, which is to keep you safe by assuming the worst. Once you understand this, once you really get that your emotions are not reliable narrators, everything shifts. You can feel anxious without believing your anxiety. Feel angry without acting from anger. Feel shame without accepting shame's verdict that you're fundamentally flawed. This is psychological sovereignty. This is mental unbreakability. And it starts with this one simple practice: observation without identification. Now, the second rule builds directly on this first one. And it's going to sound harsh, but stay with me. Your reputation is a prison you built. Every time you explain yourself, defend your choices, or manage how you're perceived, you're adding bars to this prison. You're reinforcing this cage that keeps you trapped in other people's opinions. And here's the cruel irony. The more you try to control your reputation, the less freedom you have. The more you care about how you're perceived, the less authentic you can be. Think about it. How many times have you not done something because of how it would look? How many times have you made a choice not based on what you wanted or what was right, but based on what people would think? How many times have you stayed in a situation that was killing you because leaving would require explaining yourself, and you couldn't bear the thought of being misunderstood? Your reputation, this carefully managed image you're trying to maintain, is costing you everything. It's costing you your authenticity, your freedom, your peace of mind. And here's the part that should really wake you up. It's not even working. People are going to misunderstand you anyway. They're going to judge you anyway. They're going to make up stories about you based on their own projections and insecurities and limited perspectives. And there's nothing you can do about that. Nothing. You could spend your entire life explaining yourself, and there would still be people who get you wrong. Still be people who think the worst. Still be people who spread rumors or make assumptions or decide you're something you're not. So what are you protecting? What's this reputation management actually getting you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the only thing it's getting you is exhaustion. Han Fei watched this destroy people. He watched brilliant strategists waste their energy on optics instead of results. Watch them make suboptimal decisions because those decisions would look better. Watch them compromise their effectiveness because they were too concerned with how they were perceived. And he realized something that most people never learn. The moment you become more concerned with how you look than with what's true, you've lost. You've surrendered your power to the crowd. And the crowd is fickle. The crowd doesn't care about you. The crowd will cheer you one day and destroy you the next, based on nothing but their own boredom and need for entertainment. The mentally unbreakable understand this. They abandon reputation management, not because they're shameless, not because they don't care about anyone, but because they've done the math and they understand that reputation is a game you cannot win. The only way to maintain a reputation is to constantly perform it, to constantly manage it, to constantly explain and defend and justify. And that's not living. That's imprisonment. So what's the alternative? Just not care what anyone thinks. Just do whatever you want with no regard for others? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this. You decide what your values are. You decide what matters to you. You decide what kind of person you want to be. And then you live that out consistently, regardless of whether people understand it or approve of it. You don't explain yourself to the crowd. You don't defend your choices to people who haven't earned the right to question them. You just live according to your own internal standards, and you let people think whatever they're going to think. Some of them will get it. Most of them won't. And that's okay, because you're not living for their understanding. You're living for your own integrity. This is hard, especially if you're someone who's spent your whole life trying to be liked, trying to be understood, trying to make sure no one thinks badly of you. The idea of just letting people misunderstand you, letting them judge you, letting them think whatever they want, it feels dangerous. It feels like you're giving up control. But here's the truth. You never had control. You were just pretending you did. You were exhausting yourself, trying to manage something fundamentally unmanageable. And in the process, you were giving away all your actual power. The power to live authentically, to make choices based on what's right rather than what's popular, to be yourself without apology. That's the power you get back when you abandon reputation management. That's the freedom that comes from letting people misunderstand you. And let me be clear about something. This doesn't mean you become reckless or cruel or inconsiderate. It doesn't mean you stop being thoughtful about how your actions affect others. What it means is that you stop trying to control their interpretation of those actions. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You stop performing. You just be who you are, and you let the chips fall where they may. Some people will love you for it. Some people will hate you for it. Most people won't think about you at all. And all of that is fine, because you're not doing this for them. You're doing it for yourself. You're doing it because living any other way is slowly killing you. Now, let's talk about the third rule, because this one is going to make some of you uncomfortable. Self-interest is not selfishness. You've been taught your whole life that putting yourself first is wrong, that your needs should come last, that being a good person means sacrificing yourself for others. And so you've spent years, maybe decades, saying yes when you mean no, giving when you're empty, accommodating other people's needs while ignoring your own. And you've told yourself this is virtue. This is love. This is what good people do. But here's what's actually happening. You're teaching people how to drain you. You're training them to disrespect your boundaries. You're showing them that your needs are negotiable while theirs are not. And over time, you become resentful, bitter, exhausted, and you wonder why people keep taking advantage of you, when you're the one who taught them that taking advantage was acceptable. The mentally unbreakable operate from a completely different premise. They understand that self-interest and selfishness are not the same thing. Self-interest means honoring your needs, setting boundaries, taking care of yourself. Selfishness means doing so at the expense of others, with no regard for how your actions affect them. You can be self-interested without being selfish. In fact, you have to be. Because here's the truth that no one wants to tell you. You cannot sustainably serve others while betraying yourself. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you give from an empty tank, every time you prioritize someone else's comfort over your own well-being, you're building resentment. And resentment poisons everything. It poisons your relationships, your generosity, your capacity for genuine love. Real service, real generosity, real love, it can only come from overflow, from abundance, from a place where your own needs are met and you're giving from genuine desire, not obligation or guilt or fear of disappointing people. But most of you aren't operating from overflow. You're operating from depletion. You're giving what you don't have, sacrificing what you need, and then wondering why you're so tired, so resentful, so unable to show up the way you want to. This isn't noble. This is self-betrayal. And here's the part that's going to sting. Every time you betray yourself like this, you're not just hurting yourself. You're hurting the people you're trying to serve. Because what they're getting from you isn't genuine. It's performance. It's duty. It's guilt-driven accommodation. And people can feel that. They can sense when your yes isn't really a yes. When your help comes with strings attached. When your generosity is actually just a way to avoid conflict or manage how you're perceived. The mentally unbreakable understand this. They practice what Han Fei would call enlightened self-interest. They take care of themselves first. They honor their boundaries. They say no without explanation or apology. And because they do this, when they say yes, it's real. When they give, it's genuine. When they show up, they're fully present. This doesn't make them selfish. It makes them sustainable. It makes them trustworthy. It makes them safe to be around because you know they're not going to resent you later for what they gave today. Think about the people in your life who are genuinely generous, who show up consistently, reliably, without resentment. Chances are those people are good at boundaries. They know how to say no. They take care of themselves. They don't sacrifice themselves on the altar of other people's needs. Now, think about the people who are always giving, always accommodating, always saying yes, but you can feel the resentment underneath. The martyrdom, the subtle guilt trips. Those people aren't taking care of themselves. They're betraying themselves daily. And that betrayal leaks out in passive aggression, in resentment, in eventual explosion or withdrawal. Which kind of person do you want to be? And more importantly, which kind of person are you actually being right now? If you're honest, really honest, you'll probably realize you're more of the second type. You're giving from depletion, saying yes from fear, accommodating from guilt, and you're calling it love when really it's just an inability to honor yourself. This has to stop. Not because honoring yourself is more important than honoring others, but because you cannot do one without the other. Real love requires boundaries. Real service requires self-care. Real generosity requires that you have something to give. So here's what this looks like in practice. You start saying no without explanation, without apology, without a long story about why you can't. Just no. I'm not available for that. That doesn't work for me. I'm going to pass. And you let people be disappointed. You let them be confused. You let them think you're selfish if that's the story they need to tell. Because their disappointment is not your emergency. Their needs are not more important than yours. And your worth is not determined by how much you sacrifice yourself for others. This is going to feel wrong at first, especially if you're someone who's built your entire identity around being helpful, being available, being the person people can count on. Saying no is going to trigger guilt, anxiety, fear that people will abandon you if you're not constantly accommodating them. But here's what will actually happen. Some people will be upset. They'll push back. They'll try to guilt you into changing your mind. And those people, they were using you. They didn't value you. They valued what you did for them. And those relationships needed to end anyway. Other people will respect your boundaries. They'll adjust. They'll understand that no is a complete sentence. And those relationships will get stronger, deeper, more authentic. Because now you're showing up as a whole person, not a doormat. The mentally unbreakable know this. They know that boundaries don't push people away. Boundaries reveal who is never really there for you in the first place. And here's the beautiful part. When you start honoring yourself like this, when you start operating from self-interest rather than self-betrayal, you have more to give, not less. More. Because you're not depleted. You're not resentful. You're not running on empty. You're actually taking care of yourself, which means you can genuinely show up for others. This is what Han Fei understood. That effective leadership, effective service, effective anything, it requires you to be operating from a place of strength. And you cannot be strong while constantly betraying yourself. You cannot be effective while ignoring your own needs. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. So fill yourself first. Honor yourself. Protect your energy. Set boundaries. Say no. And then from that place of overflow, give, serve, love. But do it because you want to, not because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't. This is enlightened self-interest. This is mental unbreakability. This is how you become someone who can sustain their generosity over decades, not just days. Now, the fourth rule is going to challenge another thing you've been taught. Conflict avoidance is weakness disguised as peace. You think you're being mature by avoiding difficult conversations, by keeping the peace, by not rocking the boat. You tell yourself you're choosing your battles, being wise, taking the high road. But here's what's actually happening. You're being a coward. And that cowardice is making you fragile. Every time you avoid a necessary confrontation, you're teaching yourself that you can't handle discomfort. You're reinforcing this belief that conflict is dangerous, that speaking up is risky, that it's better to stay silent than to risk upset. And over time, this makes you weaker, more anxious, less capable of standing up for yourself when it matters. The mentally unbreakable understands something crucial. Conflict is not the enemy. Unspoken resentment is. Avoided conversations are. The things you don't say, the boundaries you don't set, the grievances you swallow, those are what poison relationships. Those are what build walls. Those are what eventually explode in ways that destroy everything. Healthy conflict is actually intimacy. It's caring enough about a relationship to work through hard things. It's trusting that you can disagree and still be okay. It's believing that honesty is more important than comfort. But most of you don't believe that. You believe conflict equals rejection. That if you speak up, people will leave. That if you set a boundary, you'll be seen as difficult. So you stay silent. You accommodate. You smile while you're dying inside. And you call it peacekeeping when really it's just fear. Here's what Han Fei observed. The kingdoms that fell weren't the ones with the most conflict. They were the ones where truth couldn't be spoken, where advisors were afraid to challenge the ruler, where disagreement was seen as disloyalty. In those kingdoms, problems festered. Bad decisions went unchallenged. And by the time the truth finally came out, it was too late. The same thing happens in your relationships, in your life. The things you don't say don't disappear. They accumulate. They build pressure. And eventually, they explode. Or worse, they don't explode. They just slowly kill the relationship from the inside. You become distant, resentful, checked out, and the other person has no idea why, because you never told them. This is what conflict avoidance actually costs you. Not just your voice, but your relationships. Because you can't be close to people you can't be honest with. You can't love people you're afraid to upset. You can't build anything real on a foundation of unsaid things. The mentally unbreakable lean into friction. Not because they enjoy conflict, not because they're aggressive or confrontational, but because they understand that temporary discomfort is better than permanent resentment. That a difficult conversation today prevents an explosion tomorrow. That honesty, even when it's hard, is the only path to real connection. So what does this look like practically? It means you say the thing you're afraid to say. You tell your friend that what they said hurt you. You tell your partner you're not okay with something. You tell your boss that this workload is unsustainable. You tell your family member that you need space. You tell the person who keeps crossing your boundaries that this has to stop. You do it calmly, clearly, without aggression, but you do it. You don't wait for the perfect moment. You don't rehearse it 1,000 times. You don't try to find the gentlest possible way to say it. You just say it. Hey, I need to talk to you about something. This thing that happened, it didn't work for me. Here's what I need going forward. And then you let them respond. Maybe they'll understand. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll apologize. Maybe they'll get defensive. That's not your problem. Your job isn't to control their reaction. Your job is to speak your truth, to honor yourself, to refuse to carry resentment in silence. This is scary. I know it's scary, especially if you're someone who's spent your whole life keeping the peace. The idea of initiating conflict, even healthy conflict, feels dangerous. Like you're risking everything. Like people will leave. Like you'll be seen as difficult or dramatic or too much. But here's what actually happens. Some people will respect you more. They'll appreciate your honesty. They'll be relieved that you're finally being real with them because they probably sensed something was off anyway. Those relationships get deeper, stronger, more authentic. Other people won't handle it well. They'll get defensive. They'll make you the problem for speaking up. They'll try to manipulate you into backing down. And that's information. That's them showing you who they are. That's them revealing that they don't actually value you. They value the version of you that never challenges them, never has needs, never rocks the boat. And those people, you're better off without them. I know that's hard to hear. I know you want to believe you can maintain every relationship if you just manage it carefully enough. But you can't. Some relationships are built on your silence, your accommodation, your willingness to shrink yourself. And those relationships have to end for you to become whole. The mentally unbreakable know this. They know that speaking up means some people will leave. And they're okay with that, because they'd rather be alone and authentic than surrounded by people who only like the fake version. This doesn't mean you become needlessly confrontational. It doesn't mean you go around starting fights or being aggressive or creating drama. What it means is that you stop avoiding necessary conversations. You stop swallowing things that need to be said. You stop pretending everything is fine when it's not. You become someone who can handle conflict, who can sit in discomfort, who can say hard things and survive other people's reactions. And that makes you unbreakable. Because most of what makes people fragile isn't external circumstances. It's their inability to handle interpersonal tension, their fear of confrontation, their terror of being disliked. When you overcome that fear, when you learn that you can speak up and the world doesn't end, you become free. You become powerful. You become someone who can navigate any situation because you're not held hostage by other people's potential reactions. Let me tell you something else about this. Something most people miss. When you avoid conflict, you're not actually protecting the relationship. You're protecting yourself from discomfort. You're choosing your temporary comfort over the long-term health of the relationship. And that's not loving. That's not generous. That's selfish. Real love is willing to be uncomfortable. Real friendship can handle honesty. Real connection requires that you show up fully, even when it's hard. And if a relationship can't survive you being honest, it wasn't a real relationship in the first place. This is hard medicine. I know, but it's the truth. And the mentally unbreakable live in truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. So start practicing. Start with small things. Tell the server your order is wrong. Tell your friend you'd rather do something else. Tell your partner something small that's been bothering you. Build the muscle. Show yourself that you can speak up and survive it. That the world doesn't end. That people don't abandon you. That you're capable of handling whatever reaction comes. And then, when the bigger things come, and they will, you'll be ready. You'll have the strength to say what needs to be said, to set the boundaries that need to be set, to have the confrontations that need to happen. This is the fourth rule. Conflict avoidance is weakness disguised as peace. The unbreakable lean into friction because they know temporary discomfort is always better than permanent resentment. Now we come to the fifth rule, and this one is going to feel like permission to some of you and betrayal to others. Your past self-commitments are not binding. You made promises, set goals, declared positions, told people who you were and what you stood for. And now you've changed. You've grown. You've learned new things. You've had experiences that shifted your perspective. And those old promises, those old commitments, those old declarations of who you are, they don't fit anymore. But you feel trapped by them. Because to change now would be inconsistent, would be flaky, would be admitting you were wrong. And you've been taught that consistency is virtue. That changing your mind is weakness. That integrity means following through on what you said you'd do, even when circumstances change, even when you change. And so you stay trapped in careers that no longer serve you, in relationships that no longer work, in identities that no longer fit, in goals that no longer matter, all because you committed to them at some point, and changing course feels like failure. The mentally unbreakable understand something that most people never learn. Consistency is a trap that punishes growth. Think about it. Why is consistency considered a virtue? Because it's predictable. It's comfortable for other people. It's easier to deal with someone who's consistent than someone who's evolving. But predictability and growth are often at odds. Growth requires change. Change requires inconsistency. And if you're more committed to being consistent than being authentic, you'll stay stuck forever. Han Fei watched this in the political realm. Leaders who made decisions based on what they'd said in the past, rather than what the current situation required. Strategists who stuck to plans that were no longer relevant because they'd publicly committed to them. Advisors who defended positions they no longer believed in because changing their stance would make them look weak. And their kingdoms suffered. Because reality doesn't care about your consistency. Reality changes. Circumstances shift. New information emerges. And the person who refuses to adapt because they're too attached to being consistent, that person becomes obsolete. The same thing happens in your personal life. You declare you're going to do something, and circumstances change, but you push forward anyway because you said you would. You commit to a path, and you realize it's the wrong path, but you stay on it because you don't want to look like a quitter. You take a position on something, and you learn new information that contradicts that position, but you defend the old position anyway because admitting you were wrong feels like weakness. This is insane. This is choosing ego over truth. This is prioritizing how you look over what's real. And it's keeping you trapped in versions of yourself that you've outgrown. The mentally unbreakable practice what I call strategic inconsistency. They change their minds when new evidence arrives. They abandon sunk costs. They release dead dreams. They let themselves evolve without apology. They understand that the person who made that commitment, maybe that was you 5 years ago, or 1 year ago, or even 6 months ago, that person doesn't exist anymore. You're different now. You know different things. You've had different experiences. You've grown. And the idea that you should still be bound by what that previous version of you decided is absurd. Imagine if you met someone who told you they were still committed to everything they decided when they were 20. Every goal, every belief, every promise. You wouldn't think, wow, what integrity. You'd think, wow, what stagnation. So why are you holding yourself to that standard? Why are you treating your past self-decisions as sacred? Why are you sacrificing your present self on the altar of consistency? You don't owe anyone consistency. You owe yourself honesty. And sometimes honesty means saying, I know I said I wanted this, but I don't anymore. I know I committed to this path, but it's not the right path. I know I took this position, but I was wrong. That's not weakness. That's courage. That's growth. That's mental flexibility, which is the opposite of fragility. Now, I can already hear some of you pushing back on this. But what about integrity? What about keeping your word? What about being reliable? And those are valid questions. I'm not saying you should break promises casually. I'm not saying commitments don't matter. What I'm saying is that you have to distinguish between commitments made to others in relationship and commitments made to yourself about who you're supposed to be. If you promised your partner you'd be faithful, that's a commitment in relationship. If you promised your kids you'd show up for them, that's a commitment in relationship. Those commitments matter. Those commitments require integrity. But if you promise yourself you become a doctor and you realize you hate medicine, that's not a commitment you need to keep. If you declared you'd never change your political beliefs and you've learned things that change your perspective, you're allowed to change. If you committed to a goal that no longer serves you, a career that's killing you, a path that's wrong for you, you're allowed to change course. The mentally unbreakable know the difference. They honor their commitments to others while releasing their attachment to outdated versions of themselves. They keep their word in relationships while allowing themselves to evolve as individuals. And here's the beautiful part. When you give yourself permission to change, to grow, to become inconsistent, you become more authentic, more real, more alive, because you're not performing some frozen version of who you were. You're showing up as who you are right now in this moment. People might be confused. They might be disappointed. They might say, "But you said you were going to do this. You said you believe that. You said you were this kind of person." And you get to respond, "I did say that. And I meant it at the time. And I've changed." And that's okay. You don't owe them an elaborate explanation. You don't need to justify your evolution. You just get to be different, to change, to grow, and to trust that the people who matter will respect that, even if they don't understand it. This is liberation. This is what it means to stop being imprisoned by your past, to stop sacrificing your present for some imagined future where all your old commitments finally pay off and everyone sees that you were consistent and therefore worthy. Nobody cares about your consistency except you. And the version of you that's clinging to it, that's the scare version. The version that thinks your worth is tied to never changing your mind. The version that believes growth is inconsistency and inconsistency is failure. That version is wrong. Growth is evolution. Inconsistency is adaptation. And failure isn't changing your mind. Failure is refusing to change when change is necessary. So here's what this looks like in practice. You audit your commitments. All of them. Your career, your relationships, your goals, your beliefs, your habits. Everything you've told yourself you have to do, have to be, have to achieve. And you ask yourself honestly, do I still want this? Does this still serve me? Is this still true? And if the answer is no, you give yourself permission to release it. Not impulsively, not recklessly, but deliberately, consciously, with full awareness that you're choosing your present self over your past self's expectations. Some things you'll keep, some things you'll modify, some things you'll abandon entirely. And all of that is okay. All of that is growth. All of that is you taking responsibility for your own life instead of living according to some script you wrote when you knew less than you know now. The mentally unbreakable do this constantly. They're always auditing, always reassessing, always willing to change course when necessary. And this doesn't make them unreliable. It makes them authentic. It makes them responsive to reality rather than enslaved to consistency. This is the fifth rule. Your past self's commitments are not binding. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to grow. You're allowed to become someone different than who you were. And you don't need anyone's permission to do it. Now, the sixth rule is going to challenge something you've been told is always good, always healthy, always brave. Vulnerability without discernment is self-harm. You've heard it everywhere. Be vulnerable. Open up. Share your story. Let people see the real you. And there's truth in that. Connection requires vulnerability. Intimacy requires openness. You can't build real relationships while hiding behind walls. But here's what they don't tell you. Not everyone deserves access to your interior. Not everyone has earned the right to know your wounds. Not everyone is safe enough to hold your truth. And when you're vulnerable with the wrong people, People who haven't demonstrated trustworthiness, people who don't have your best interests at heart, people who are just looking for ammunition. You're not being brave. You're being reckless. You're harming yourself. The mentally unbreakable understand this distinction. They practice strategic vulnerability. They're open, yes. They're honest, yes. But they're also discerning about who gets access to what level of depth. They understand that vulnerability is not a performance. It's not something you do to prove you're healed or brave or authentic. It's something you offer to people who've earned it in contexts where it serves connection rather than just exposure. Han Fei would have understood this immediately. He distinguished between allies and audience. Allies are people who are genuinely invested in your well-being, who have demonstrated loyalty, who hold your confidences, who respond to vulnerability with care. Those people get the real you. Those people get your truth. Audience is everyone else. People who are curious. People who are entertained by your story. People who are gathering information. People who might use what you share against you later. Those people don't get your interior. They get your public self. And that's appropriate. But modern culture has confused these categories. It's told you that everyone deserves your truth, that being closed off is toxic, that if you're not sharing everything with everyone, you're being inauthentic. And so you've been spilling your guts to people who haven't earned it, sharing your wounds with people who can't hold them, performing vulnerability for an audience that doesn't actually care about your healing. And then you wonder why you feel exposed, why you feel taken advantage of, why people use your honesty against you, why your vulnerability gets weaponized. It's because you've been giving it to the wrong people. The mentally unbreakable have a much clearer filter. They ask themselves, has this person demonstrated that they can hold what I'm about to share? Have they shown me that my trust is well placed? Will sharing this serve connection? Or am I just performing openness? And if the answer is unclear, they hold back. Not because they're closed or inauthentic, but because they're wise. Because they understand that your wounds are not portfolio pieces. Your struggles are not content. Your interior life is not public property. There's this trend right now of radical transparency, of sharing everything online, in person, with anyone who'll listen. And it's sold as healing, as authenticity, as bravery. But watch what happens to people who live this way. Watch how they become fragile, how they're constantly getting hurt by people's reactions, how they're always dealing with the consequences of oversharing. That's not healing. That's self-harm. That's taking something sacred, your inner world, and broadcasting it to people who haven't earned the privilege of knowing you that deeply. The mentally unbreakable protect their interior, not because they're ashamed, not because they're hiding, but because they understand that depth requires protection, that not everyone is capable of meeting you at that level, that opening yourself to everyone is just another way of abandoning yourself. So what does strategic vulnerability look like? It means you have different levels of openness for different levels of relationship. Acquaintances get your surface. Friends get more. Close friends get deeper. Intimate relationships get your core. And you don't skip levels. You don't trauma dump on people you just met. You don't share your deepest wounds with people who haven't proven they can handle lighter ones. You let trust build gradually. You test the waters. You notice how people respond to smaller vulnerabilities before offering bigger ones. You pay attention to who holds your words carefully and who gossips about them, who responds with empathy and who responds with judgment, who leans in and who pulls away, and you adjust accordingly. You give more access to people who've proven safe. You reduce access to people who've proven unsafe. You don't keep giving your truth to people who've shown they can't be trusted with it. This isn't being closed off. This is being wise. This is understanding that vulnerability is powerful, which means it needs to be wielded carefully. You wouldn't give a stranger the keys to your house. Why would you give them the keys to your psyche? Now, some of you are thinking, but what about being authentic? What about not hiding? And I hear you, but there's a difference between hiding and having boundaries. Hiding is when you're afraid of being known. Boundaries are when you're discerning about who gets to know you. Hiding is fear-based. Boundaries are wisdom-based. Hiding makes you smaller. Boundaries make you safer. Hiding is about shame. Boundaries are about protection. The mentally unbreakable aren't hiding. They're just not performing. They're not confusing vulnerability with exhibition. They're not treating their inner world like content to be consumed. They're honoring themselves by being selective about who gets access. And here's what happens when you practice strategic vulnerability. Your relationships get deeper. Because you're not wasting your emotional energy on people who can't hold it. You're investing in people who've proven trustworthy. And those relationships become solid, safe, real. You also become less fragile. Because you're not constantly exposing yourself to people who are going to hurt you. You're not setting yourself up for betrayal by trusting prematurely. You're building trust slowly, deliberately, with evidence. This is the sixth rule. Vulnerability without discernment is self-harm. Your wounds are not portfolio pieces. Your struggles are not content. Your interior life is not public property. Be vulnerable, yes, but be strategic about it. Give access to people who've earned it. And protect your depth from people who can't appreciate it. We're at the seventh and final rule now, and this one might be the most important, the one that ties everything else together. And it's this: suffering is optional, pain is mandatory. Let me explain what I mean by that, because these words get used interchangeably and they shouldn't. Pain is what happens to you. Loss, failure, betrayal, rejection, illness, death. All the unavoidable difficulties that come with being human. You can't escape pain. It's part of the deal. If you're alive, you're going to experience pain. That's mandatory. But suffering? Suffering is what you do with the pain. Suffering is the story you tell about it, the meaning you make from it, the identity you build around it, the way you narrate it as evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you, with your life, with the world. Pain says, "This hurts." Suffering says, "This means I'm broken." Pain says, "I lost something important." Suffering says, "I'll never be happy again." Pain says, "This person betrayed me." Suffering says, "No one can be trusted." Do you see the difference? Pain is the experience. Suffering is the interpretation. And while you can't control pain, you have complete control over suffering. You get to decide what the pain means. You get to decide what story you tell about it. You get to decide whether this becomes evidence of brokenness or evidence of being human. The mentally unbreakable experience the same pain you do. Same losses, same failures, same betrayals, same heartbreaks. But they don't add suffering on top of it. They don't make it mean something about their worth or their future or their fundamental flaws. They just let it be pain. Difficult, intense, real pain. But just pain, not a referendum on who they are. This is the ultimate form of mental unbreakability. Because once you understand this distinction, once you really get it, nothing can truly break you. Things can hurt you. Things can disappoint you. Things can challenge you. But they can't break you. Because breaking requires suffering, and suffering is optional. Han Fei understood this in a different context. He watched people destroyed, not by their circumstances, but by their interpretation of those circumstances. Leaders who fell into despair, not because their situation was hopeless, but because they decided it was. Advisors who gave up not because defeat was certain, but because they narrated it as certain. The circumstances were often the same for everyone, but some people interpreted them as challenge. Others interpreted them as catastrophe, and that interpretation determined everything. Who persisted and who gave up? Who found creative solutions and who collapsed? Who emerged stronger and who never recovered? Same pain, different suffering, different outcomes. This is the power you have. Not to avoid pain, you can't, but to decide what pain means. To refuse to add unnecessary suffering on top of necessary pain. To observe what's happening without making it mean you're fundamentally flawed or your life is ruined or you'll never be okay again. Most people don't realize they're doing this. They think suffering is automatic. They think pain and suffering are the same thing. Something bad happens, and they immediately start catastrophizing, fortune-telling, globalizing. This always happens to me. Nothing ever works out. I'm cursed. I'm broken. What's the point? And they believe these thoughts. They treat them as facts rather than interpretations. And in believing them, they create suffering that's far worse than the original pain. The mentally unbreakable notice these thoughts. They hear the catastrophizing. They catch the fortune-telling. They observe the globalizing. But they don't believe it. They recognize it for what it is. The mind doing what minds do, which is trying to make sense of pain by creating narratives about it. And they question those narratives. Is this true? Is this helpful? Is this serving me? Or is this just my brain trying to protect me by convincing me that everything is terrible so I won't be disappointed again? Usually, it's the latter. Usually, the suffering narratives are just protection mechanisms. Ways your brain tries to keep you safe by keeping you small, by convincing you not to hope, not to try, not to risk, because look what happened last time. But that's not serving you. That's imprisoning you. That's turning pain, which is temporary, into suffering, which is chronic. So here's what this looks like in practice. Something painful happens. You feel it fully. You don't suppress it. You don't pretend it doesn't hurt. You acknowledge the pain. You let yourself grieve, or rage, or feel disappointed, or whatever the authentic emotional response is. But then you notice what story you're starting to tell about it. You notice if you're making it mean something about your worth, about your future, about your fundamental nature. And you challenge that story. You question it. You ask yourself, is this interpretation true? Or is this just one possible interpretation? And usually, you'll realize there are other ways to see it. Other stories you could tell. And you choose the story that serves you. Not the story that feels most dramatic. Not the story that confirms your worst fears about yourself. But the story that's both true and useful. Something like, this hurt. This was disappointing. This was painful. And I'm going to feel this pain for a while. And eventually, I'll integrate this experience and move forward. Because I've survived painful things before, and I'll survive this too. This doesn't mean I'm broken. This means I'm human. That's a story that includes the pain, but doesn't create additional suffering. That's a narrative that honors what happened without making it mean more than it means. This is incredibly powerful, because most of the suffering in your life isn't coming from your circumstances. It's coming from your interpretation of those circumstances, from a story you're telling about what your pain means. Change the story, and you change the suffering. You can't change the pain, but you can absolutely change the suffering. The mentally unbreakable live here, in this space where they feel everything but narrate carefully, where they acknowledge pain but refuse to create suffering, where they let themselves be hurt without being broken. This doesn't mean they're cold or detached or pretending everything is fine. It means they've learned to distinguish between what happened and what it means, between the experience and the interpretation. And they've claimed authority over the interpretation. You have this same authority. You've just never been taught to use it. You've been taught that thoughts and feelings are facts, that if you feel broken, you're broken, that if you think something is hopeless, that if your mind tells you that you'll never be okay, you should believe it. But none of that is true. Your thoughts are not facts. Your feelings are not reliable narrators. Your mind is not trying to give you accurate information. It's trying to keep you safe, which often means keeping you scared. Once you understand this, once you really internalize it, you become unbreakable. Not because nothing hurts you, but because you know that hurt and broken are different things. You know that pain is an experience and suffering is a choice. You know that you can feel everything, endure everything, survive everything, without making it mean you're fundamentally damaged. This is freedom, real freedom. Not freedom from pain, that's impossible, but freedom from suffering. Freedom from narratives that turn temporary pain into permanent identity. Freedom from the stories that keep you trapped in victim consciousness. You experience pain. You feel it. You honor it. And then you decide what it means. And you decide it means something that serves you. Something that's true, but not catastrophic. Something that acknowledges reality without dramatizing it. This is the 7th rule. Suffering is optional. Pain is mandatory. You can't control what happens to you, but you have absolute control over what you make it mean. And in that control lies all your power. So let me bring this all together for you. Let me show you how these 7 rules connect, how they build on each other, how they create a complete framework for psychological unbreakability. It starts with that first insight, that foundation. You don't need anyone to understand you. The moment you need validation, you've given away your power. So you stop explaining yourself. You stop defending. You stop managing perceptions. And in doing that, you reclaim massive amounts of energy that you can invest in actually building your life. From that foundation, you recognize that your reputation is a prison. That every moment you spend managing how you're perceived is a moment you're not actually living. So you abandon reputation management. You let people misunderstand you. You make decisions based on what's right, not what's popular. And you become free. With that freedom, you start honoring yourself. You recognize that self-interest isn't selfishness, that you cannot serve from depletion, that your needs matter as much as anyone else's. So you set boundaries. You say no. You take care of yourself first. And from that overflow, you can genuinely give to others. As you start setting boundaries, you realize you can no longer avoid conflict, because boundaries create friction. And you learn that conflict avoidance is just cowardice. That temporary discomfort is always better than permanent resentment. So you start speaking up. You start having difficult conversations. You start handling interpersonal tension, and you become stronger. As you grow stronger, you realize you've changed. You're not who you were, and you give yourself permission to release old commitments. You understand that consistency is a trap, that you're allowed to evolve, that your past self's decisions don't have to govern your present, and you become flexible. With that flexibility, you become more discerning. You realize that not everyone deserves your depth. That vulnerability without discernment is self-harm. So you protect your interior. You share strategically. You give access to people who've earned it, and you become safe. And through all of this, you learn to distinguish between pain and suffering. You realize that while you can't control what happens to you, you can absolutely control what you make it mean. So you feel your pain fully without creating unnecessary suffering. You acknowledge hurt without accepting brokenness, and you become unbreakable. This is the complete framework. 7 rules that work together to create psychological sovereignty, mental fortitude, emotional resilience, not through suppression, not through toxic positivity, not through pretending, but through clarity, through honesty, through strategic detachment from the things that don't serve you and deep engagement with the things that do. These aren't easy rules to follow. I'm not going to pretend they are. They require you to go against everything you've been taught, everything you've been conditioned to believe about what makes someone good, strong, lovable, worthy. You've been taught to seek approval. These rules tell you to stop caring what people think. You've been taught to be consistent. These rules tell you to be flexible. You've been taught to avoid conflict. These rules tell you to lean into it. You've been taught to share everything. These rules tell you to be strategic. You've been taught that your suffering is evidence of your sensitivity, your depth, your humanity. These rules tell you that suffering is optional and you're creating most of it yourself. This is going to feel wrong at first. It's going to feel selfish, cold, uncaring. You're going to worry that following these rules will make you someone you don't want to be. Someone harsh, someone isolated, someone unlovable. But here's what will actually happen. You'll become more authentic, more present, more capable of genuine connection. Because you'll stop performing, stop accommodating, stop betraying yourself. And the people who respond to the real you, to the sovereign you, to the unbreakable you, those are your people. Those are the relationships worth having. Everyone else was never really there anyway. They were there for the performance, for the accommodation, for the version of you that never challenged them, never had needs, never required them to show up fully. Let them go. Let them be confused. Let them be disappointed. Let them think you've changed because you have. You've changed from someone who is breaking under the weight of other people's expectations to someone who lives according to their own values. That's not a downgrade. That's evolution. And here's what I want you to really hear, because this is important. You're not broken. You've never been broken. You've just been following bad instructions. You've been trying to build mental strength through methods that actually create fragility. You've been seeking unbreakability through approval-seeking, people-pleasing, conflict avoidance, and over-accommodation. And those things don't create strength. They create exhaustion. Real strength comes from sovereignty, from internal reference, from emotional detachment, from strategic boundaries, from willingness to be misunderstood, from flexibility, from discernment, from separating pain from suffering. That's what Han Fei understood. That's what the mentally unbreakable have always known. And that's what you're learning now. These 7 rules are your roadmap, your operating instructions, your rewiring manual. They're not quick fixes. They're not hacks. They're fundamental shifts in how you relate to yourself, to others, to reality. And they work, not because they make life easier, but because they make you stronger. Not because they eliminate pain, but because they eliminate unnecessary suffering. Not because they make everyone like you, but because they free you from needing everyone to like you. This is mental unbreakability. This is psychological sovereignty. This is what it means to be truly free. So here's what I want you to do. Pick one rule. Just one. The one that hit hardest. The one that made you uncomfortable. The one that challenged something you've been believing. And start practicing it today. Maybe it's stopping yourself before you explain, before you defend, before you justify. Just noticing that impulse and choosing not to act on it. Maybe it's saying no to something without apologizing, without explaining. Just no, that doesn't work for me, and letting people be confused or disappointed. Maybe it's having that conversation you've been avoiding, that difficult, uncomfortable conversation that needs to happen. Doing it badly, doing it scared, but doing it. Maybe it's auditing your commitments, looking at everything you've told yourself you have to do, have to achieve, and asking honestly, do I still want this? Maybe it's being more discerning about who gets your truth, who gets your vulnerability, who gets access to your interior. Maybe it's catching yourself when you start catastrophizing, when you start making pain mean something about your fundamental brokenness, and questioning that narrative. Just one. Start with one. Show yourself that these rules aren't just theory. They're practice. They're things you can actually do, starting today, that will change how you experience life. And as you practice one, you'll naturally start integrating the others. Because they're all connected. They're all part of this larger framework of psychological sovereignty. And once you start living from this place, everything shifts. You become calmer. Not because life gets easier, but because you're not creating extra drama. You're not adding suffering to pain. You're not exhausting yourself with explanation and defense and performance. You become clearer, not because you have all the answers, but because you're not confused by other people's opinions. You're not distracted by the need for approval. You're internally referenced. You know what matters to you. You become stronger, not because nothing affects you, but because you can handle whatever comes. You can feel pain without breaking. Experience loss without shattering. Face rejection without collapsing. You become free, not because you have no responsibilities, but because you're not enslaved to perceptions, not held hostage by fear of judgment, not imprisoned by consistency or approval seeking or conflict avoidance. This is what I want for you. This is what these 7 rules can give you. Not perfection, not immunity from pain, not some unrealistic ideal of never struggling, but sovereignty, clarity, strength, freedom, the ability to live your life according to your values instead of other people's expectations, the ability to feel everything without being destroyed by it, the ability to keep going, keep growing, keep choosing yourself, even when it's hard. You are the ruler of exactly one kingdom, your mind, and these 7 rules are how you reclaim that throne, how you take back your authority from all the people and beliefs and fears that have been governing you. It's time. It's time to stop breaking in ways you can't control. It's time to stop explaining yourself to people who don't deserve explanations. It's time to stop sacrificing yourself on the altar of other people's comfort. It's time to stop confusing suffering with depth and consistency with integrity and conflict avoidance with peace. It's time to become mentally unbreakable, not through hardness, but through flexibility, not through suppression, but through detachment, not through isolation, but through discernment, not through pretending, but through truth. You're not broken. You were just taught to believe your humanity was weakness. It isn't. Your emotions aren't the problem. Your obedience to them is. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be freed. And these 7 rules? They're your freedom, your sovereignty, Your path to becoming the kind of person who can bend without breaking, who can feel without drowning, who can stand alone without being lonely, who can change without being lost. That's who you're becoming. Not through some massive transformation that happens overnight, but through small choices, daily practices, moments where you choose sovereignty over approval, truth over comfort, boundaries over accommodation, growth over consistency. It's happening already. The fact that you're still here, still listening, still willing to have your assumptions challenged, that's evidence. That's you choosing growth. That's you stepping into your own authority. So let me leave you with this. A mantra, something you can come back to when you're doubting yourself, when you're scared, when you're tempted to slip back into old patterns of explaining and defending and people-pleasing and suffering. Here it is. You were never broken. You were just playing by rules that were designed to keep you small. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be free. And freedom starts the moment you stop needing permission to be who you are. That's it. That's the whole thing. You were never broken. You don't need permission. You're already everything you need to be. You just need to stop apologizing for it. Stop apologizing for changing your mind. Stop apologizing for having boundaries. Stop apologizing for not explaining yourself. Stop apologizing for prioritizing yourself. Stop apologizing for being human. You're allowed to be inconsistent. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to disappoint people. You're allowed to be misunderstood. You're allowed to protect your energy. You're allowed to feel pain without making it mean you're broken. You're allowed. You've always been allowed. You just forgot. Or maybe you never knew. But you know now. And knowing changes everything. So here's what I'm asking you to do. If this resonated with you, if something in these 7 rules spoke to something you've been feeling but couldn't name, let me know in the comments. Tell me which rule hit hardest, which one made you uncomfortable, which one you're going to start practicing today. And if you want more of this, more uncomfortable truth, more psychological rewiring, more frameworks that actually change how you think instead of just how you feel, subscribe. Hit that button, because I'm going to keep making content like this. Content that challenges. Content that disturbs. Content that frees. Not everyone wants this. Not everyone is ready for it. Some people prefer the comfortable lies, the feel-good platitudes, the advice that never asks them to change anything fundamental. But you're not those people. If you were, you wouldn't have made it this far. You wouldn't have stayed through 50 minutes of me challenging every comfortable assumption you've been carrying. You're here because you're ready. Ready to stop breaking. Ready to stop performing. Ready to stop living according to other people's instruction manuals. Ready to become sovereign. And I'm here to help you do that. To give you the tools, the frameworks, the permission, the validation that yes, you can live differently. Yes, you can stop caring what people think. Yes, you can set boundaries and have conflict and change your mind and protect your energy and still be a good person. A worthy person. A lovable person. In fact, you'll be more lovable because you'll finally be real, finally be authentic, finally be yourself instead of some carefully managed performance. And the people who love that version, the real version, the sovereign version, the unbreakable version, those are your people. Those are the relationships that will sustain you. Those are the connections that matter. Everyone else was just practicing on you anyway, teaching you what you don't want, showing you what doesn't work, preparing you for this moment, right now, where you finally decide, I'm done breaking. I'm done explaining. I'm done performing. I'm ready to be free. So welcome. Welcome to psychological sovereignty. Welcome to mental unbreakability. Welcome to the rest of your life, lived according to your own rules, guided by your own values, free from the prison of other people's opinions. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to challenge you. It's going to require you to disappoint some people, to set some boundaries, to have some hard conversations, to change in ways that confuse others. But it's going to be worth it. Because on the other side of that discomfort is freedom. Real freedom. The kind that doesn't require anyone's approval. The kind that doesn't break under pressure. The kind that lets you sleep at night because you're finally living in integrity with yourself. That's what these 7 rules give you. That's what Han Fei understood. That's what the mentally unbreakable have always known. And now you know it too. So go. Practice. Experiment. Try one rule. See what happens. Notice how it feels to stop explaining, to say no, to lean into conflict, to honor yourself, to change your mind, to protect your depth, to separate pain from suffering. Notice how much energy you get back, how much clearer you become, how much stronger you feel, not because you're suppressing or numbing or pretending, but because you're finally living from truth, from sovereignty, from your own authority. This is your life, not a dress rehearsal, not a practice round. This is it, and you get to decide how you live it. You get to decide whose opinions matter. You get to decide what your pain means. You get to decide who you're becoming. No one else gets that power unless you give it to them, and you've been giving it away your whole life. To parents, to partners, to friends, to strangers, to your own catastrophizing mind. Take it back. Reclaim it. Own it. This is your mind, your life, your sovereignty, and nobody can break you unless you hand them the hammer and show them where to hit. So stop handing them the hammer. Stop showing them your vulnerabilities so they know where to aim. Stop performing your wounds for an audience that doesn't care about your healing. Live, sovereign, free, unbreakable. That's my wish for you. That's what I want you to take from this. Not just information, but transformation. Not just knowing these rules, but living them, embodying them, becoming them. Because you deserve that. You deserve to be free. You deserve to be unbreakable. You deserve to live without constantly explaining yourself, defending yourself, performing yourself for people who are never really paying attention anyway. You deserve sovereignty, and it's yours. It's always been yours. You just have to claim it. So claim it. Today, right now, with whatever small step you can take. Stop yourself before you explain. Say no without apologizing. Have that difficult conversation. Audit those commitments. Protect your depth. Question your suffering. Choose one. Do it scared. Do it imperfectly, but do it. And then come back and tell me what happened. Tell me what you learned. Tell me how it felt. Tell me what changed. Because this is a journey we're on together. Me sharing what I've learned from studying the unbreakable. You practicing it in your life. Us figuring out together what it means to be psychologically sovereign in a world that wants you small, accommodating, and controllable. We're doing this. We're building this. We're creating a community of people who refuse to break, who refuse to perform, who refuse to live according to anyone else's script. And if that speaks to you, if that's the person you want to become, then stay. Subscribe, engage, practice, share what you're learning, ask questions, challenge me, tell me where these rules don't work, tell me what I'm missing, because I'm still learning too, still practicing, still becoming. And that's the point. The mentally unbreakable aren't people who've arrived. They're people who are committed to the practice, to the daily choice, to sovereignty over comfort, truth over approval, freedom over performance. That's who we are. That's who we're becoming. And I'm honored to be on this journey with you. Thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being willing to have your world shaken up a little. Thank you for being ready. Now go. Practice. Live. Be sovereign. Be free. Be unbreakable. I'll see you in the next one.